Okay, I just got a message, sorry. It's great to have you here, and we should start just in a few sentences in Hebrew, and then we should continue. שלום לכולם, ברוכים הבאים למפגש השלישי של היוזמה של אספת אזרחים ראשונה בישראל. אני רוצה ככה רק לתת כמה מילות רקע בעצם על מי עושה את המפגש הזה. היוזמה לאספת אזרחים ראשונה בישראל קמה בערך לפני כשנה, אפילו פחות. היא התחילה אחרי וובינר ממש כללי שסיפר על הרעיון של אספת אזרחים כפי שהוא נעשה בעולם. זה המשיך לקבוצה של ארגונים ואנשים שהתכנסו בקיץ האחרון על מנת להקים את היוזמה שלה, שיש לה מטרה מאוד ברורה, להקים אספת אזרחים ראשונה בישראל. בדומה לדוגמאות כפי שהן קורות בעולם. זו הזדמנות בשבילי להגיד תודה לדבי, לקרמל, לדיוויד שנמצאים כאן מהיוזמה הזאת, על כל המהלכים לקראת המפגש הזה. זה מפגש שלישי שאנחנו עורכים כחלק מהעבודה שלנו. אני רוצה לשתף אתכם במשהו אחד שעומד לקרות במסגרת היוזמה שלנו, מקווה שרואים את זה, וזה הקול הקורא בעצם שעומד לצאת בימים הקרובים לרשויות מקומיות שמעוניינות לערוך אספת אזרחים מקומית. אנחנו מתכוונים לערוך אספת אזרחים מקומית כסוג של פיילוט לפני האספה הארצית שבתקווה אנחנו נצליח להקים ולממש אותה. אז כשזה יהיה, זה בוודאי יגיע אליכם גם כן, הקול קורא הזה. מדובר ברשות מקומית שתרצה לקיים אספת אזרחים בתמיכה שלנו בעשייה הזאת. הנושא באופן כללי שאנחנו בחרנו לקיום אספה מקומית כזאת, זה קיימות מקומית והקשרים של משבר האקלים. At this point, my colleague, David from the Heschel Center, which sponsors this meeting, please continue.
תודה רונן, ותודה לכם שכולם שהגיעו למפגש השלישי בסדרת הלמידה. Jane, we're thrilled that you're here. Actually, Ronen told about what we've done over the last year in trying to start up citizens' assemblies in Israel, and you were at the first webinar, and here you're back with us again, which I'm really thrilled that you agreed to do that. I take it it's not easy in Ireland to say today you're coming to Israel to do a webinar, which means something about your courage or sense of justice or something. Thank you very much for coming despite what you might have faced from your colleagues. And yes, today we're hosting you. I'll say a few words of introduction about Professor Jane Suter, who is one of the foremost practitioners and theoreticians in the field of deliberative democracy. Professor Suter is a director of the Fujo Research Center at the Dublin City University with a focus on the public sphere and scaling up deliberation and tackling disinformation. She is a senior research fellow on the Irish Citizens Assembly, which is the mythological Citizens Assembly that we look to inspiration for, and one on gender equality, which happened very, very recently. And you're one of the lead sponsors, leaders of the Irish Citizens Assembly in 2016 and the Constitutional Convention in 2012 to 14. And you're the founder of the We the Citizens initiative in Ireland, the first deliberative experiment. Professor Suter is a member of the stewarding group of the Scottish Citizens Assembly and a member of the OECD's Future Democracy Network. She's also RIA nominee on the Aliyah's Fact or Fake project on scientific disinformation. And she was the joint winner of the Brown Democracy Medal in 2019 and the President's Award for Research and the Irish Research Council's Researcher of the Year 2020. Again, we are delighted that you're here. And today's topic that we selected, which is very, very rife and relevant to us, is how and if citizens' assemblies can be run in context of polarization and conflict. So the screen is yours, Professor Suter.
Okay, thank you so much, David. Hello, everybody. What a long welcome. Sorry, you all had to sit through all of that, but thank you very much. Much appreciated. So yeah, I had a quick chat earlier in the week to David and to Ronan, and we kind of tried to put together what might be kind of most interesting. So I think we decided that not everybody here would have been here last year, so I'll do a brief introduction to citizens' assemblies and what they are. And I'll try to focus on the importance then of the connection between the citizens' assembly and the wider decision-making process and the representative process and so on. And then I'll talk a little bit about, I understand if you're planning a citizen assembly, it's likely to be on climate and sustainability issues and so on. So I'll talk a little bit about the Scottish Climate Assembly, and I'll finish up with kind of a brief kind of proposal of what we're thinking about in terms of kind of the divided society in Northern Ireland, in case that might be of interest here. But of course, I'll try to keep my my talk short, because I can talk about lots of elements of this, and so sometimes the answering of questions and the discussion is more interesting for people than just looking at some slides. But
Jane, I did tell everyone in the chat that if something's not understandable or a word or a concept, so they'll write it up in the chat and we could stop.
Yeah, absolutely. Just shout at any moment.
We will have a Q&A about halfway through the webinar, so that we can answer questions and have people can discuss the ideas that you're raising. Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, just shout at me. I can stop at any moment. So I borrowed this kind of explanatory infographic from the Scottish Citizen Assembly. I thought it kind of put together the concept quite nicely in one picture. So the idea of the Citizen Assembly is that you have a demographically representative group of members. They're usually chosen by sortition, by random selection, much like a jury in a criminal trial might be. In some processes, they're also selected by where they are on the partisan divide, or where they are in terms of their attitude to a particular issue. So the British, when they started looking at Brexit, after the Brexit vote, wanted to represent that 52-48. So they did that. The idea is then that they come together. It used to always be face-to-face, but now, of course, in the last year, most of the processes that started face-to-face have all gone online, and any of the processes which started later, after February last year, also even started online. So there's some interesting learnings and, great development of some of the more tech tools and everything for that kind of online deliberation. But still, I think the agreement is that the gold standard is, if you like, face-to-face. They're presented with expert evidence. So this is important, that there's checks for bias, that it's not just about trying to manufacture a consensus, which is in the interest of one interest group. And then they deliberate about that. And I think the important thing about the deliberation is that it's in small groups and that it's facilitated so that people are polite, they act with empathy, they listen to each other, They give evidence when they're giving reasons and so on, and then in the end they make decisions. So that's kind of the idea, I suppose, of a citizen assembly in a nutshell. So well, I won't. Oh. Sorry, I'm going to have to come out of this because I'm actually sharing the Scottish Climate Assembly slides rather than the slides that I did up for you guys. So it doesn't change anything I said, but it just means that when I move on, I'll actually be in the right place. Yeah. So it's still the same diagram there, and there we are. So it's for you guys in the Herschel Center. So this was very much what happened in Irish citizen assemblies. I won't spend more than 1 minute on this. If any of you weren't here last year or you want to know anything more about them, I can talk about it in the question and answer. But you can see here that it's in a hotel room, very much like where you might go for a wedding. People are sitting at the same round tables where they would be at a wedding. And then you can see that there is a facilitator here who's listening to people and trying to encourage them to talk. But you can see that it's one person to another talking. And the whole point of the random selection is that the people in the room are a mirror of society. So they're not the people who would normally have joined groups like yours, for example, or even golf clubs. These are people who might not even ever have voted before. So they're ordinary representatives of society without any kind of mandate. The experts are very much kept as experts, not as members. The interest groups are identified as interest groups. And some of them had politicians as fellow members and others didn't. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment when I'm trying to talk to you about that kind of link that I know you're interested in between the citizen assembly and the wider society. So we've had a number, I suppose one of the reasons everybody's interested in our example is that we've had a number of different well-known kind of outcomes from it. So we've had a number of referendums. There was one on marriage equality in 2015, on the presidential age, which actually failed, on repealing very restrictive abortion legislation in 2018. The picture you see there is in Dublin Castle of the crowds celebrating the outcome of that. One on blasphemy. There's other referendums promised on the role of women, reducing the voting age, and so on. It's also resulted in some fairly major parliamentary reforms, and also the Parliament, the Dáil, has declared a climate emergency. So when we think about it, we try to think, well, what is the kind of the process? How does this fit into the process of the representative system that we're used to? So if you like, in a normal representative system, there's pressures that come for change. They might come from farmers groups or citizens groups or youth groups or whatever it is. The government or the parliament listens to this, they debate it, they produce some legislation and either put it to a referendum or to some sort of legislative proposal. So there's no room for citizens really in here, except in this stage here, in the kind of lobbying of government or parliament. So of course, this very much privileges vested interests. It privileges inside voices. It privileges the lobbyists who can pay to have influence on government and on parliament. So the way we see these what we call constitutional mini publics, or these citizens' assemblies fitting in, is that there's pressure for change, as usual, from the government or parliament thinks about it, but in some instances, it then sets up a citizen assembly or a mini public, which then considers the issue and then puts it back to government and parliament, who then proceeds with the referendum or the legislative reform. So it's this sort of break in the middle of the representative process that allows citizens to come in, allows deliberation in at that point, allows us to hear the voices of ordinary citizens, because the citizens sitting in those hotel ballrooms, they're hearing from experts, they're hearing from academics, they're hearing from interest groups, but they're also hearing voices of other ordinary citizens who've been impacted by the legislation. So on climate change, they heard the voices of young people and their concern about climate in the future. On abortion, they heard the voices of women who'd been impacted by the very restrictive legislation. On marriage equality, they heard the voices of children who'd grown up with gay parents, but couldn't actually call both of them their parent, and so on. So it's those kind of stories also matter. So it's this way of putting a break in this old system, putting in the citizens, putting in this kind of slow down, this deliberation, allowing time to think before putting it back into the representative system again. So that's probably the kind of powerful bit of it. And then I suppose we have to think about, well, you know, the Irish Citizen Assembly, I have us here in the center, you know, what we did, but we built on work that was done on the Citizen Assembly in British Columbia and in Iceland. And we found in both of those, they didn't include politicians and political voices sufficiently. And therefore the politicians were able to act afterwards against the wishes of the assembly. So a supernormal majority was imposed in British Columbia, and the politicians campaigned against the referendum. In Iceland, these people who were elected, a new government came in and ignored them. That's going to be very interesting, I think, in Chile, which at the moment is kind of following the Icelandic process. And then following on from us was the French Citizen Convention on the Climate, which Macron very much took over, and it was probably very centrally dominated. Macron said he would implement a lot of the proposals, and then he turned his back on it. So there's people kind of wondering about it. There's the Scottish Climate Assembly, which I can talk to you about very briefly, which is very interesting in what happened. And then a new institutional process in Belgium, which I think is super interesting and is one we're interested in exploring in terms of the peace process in Northern Ireland. So are there any questions yet, David, or do you want me just to carry on with the Scottish and the Northern Irish?
I don't know if anyone wants to ask a question or just a translation of something. I'll give a very brief 2-sentence summary of what you said. Just to make sure everyone's on the same page, מה שג'יין הציגה הוא בעצם, הקונספט הוא לא להחליף את הדמוקרטיה הפרלמנטרית, אלא לעשות איזשהו בקע בתוכה, בגלל שבצורה המסורתית של קבלת החלטות, יש לאזרחים מעט מאוד מקום באמת להשפעה, רק אולי באיזה לובי בתחילת הדרך של איזו חקיקה. פה הם בעצם מעשירים את התהליך עם שמיעת כל הקולות של האזרחים ששומעים גם אחד את השני, וככה קבלת החלטות לא מוטה ל-vested interest, לאינטרסים כלכליים, פוליטיים מוקדמים. והיא הראתה את מרחב ההתנסויות שיש בעולם היום סביב המודל הזה של Citizens Assembly. אוקיי? Any questions? יש שאלות על זה עד עכשיו? יותר הבהרה? I think you can go on, Jane.
Okay. So, yeah, those of you who are interested in in doing a climate assembly and looking at that. I think looking at this report that's at that URL I've pointed out there, climate-assembly.scot, it was put up on the 24th of May. It's very interesting and sets out how they did it. I'm not going to go through all of the goals, but they were on all sorts of things from, you know, land use to volunteering and emissions and so on, and the circular economy. And they came to a huge number of 81 recommendations. All of these were agreed by a large part of the Scottish citizens. And it's worth noting these Scottish citizens came from the Highlands and Islands, which rely on oil to some extent, as well as farming communities and fishing communities, as well as, of course, people from the larger cities. So I think anybody doing a climate assembly, it's a really nice one to be able to look at. It's interesting in terms of, we'll have to watch it over the rest of this year in terms of how it gets to engage. So at the moment, we're up in this section here, engagement May to November of this year. And they have members going into the Scottish Parliament, but they'll also be addressing the COP, because the COP is in Glasgow this year. So this will be an important way for all of the governments in the COP to hear about this. And then there's an official Scottish government response due in November. From my point of view, it's a little bit weak here because it only might include a parliamentary debate. I think it would be very nice if it was like the Irish one and it said it would include a parliamentary debate. But it'll be interesting to see where this goes. But then the citizens themselves will have an opportunity to come back and reflect on the government's response. So they put a lot of work into this, and I'm hoping that the government will end up more responsive to all of their work than Macron did necessarily to all of the work of the French citizens. But definitely looking at climate, I'd recommend, it's a really nice website, having a look at that. And then this is something we're just working on. It's very much a work in progress. In fact, it's only going to be published tomorrow. But we were trying to think, and this is kind of longer term, and this is just because obviously it's Israel, but you know, how could deliberation work in a divided society? And the most important thing is that the two principles underpinning deliberation are inclusion and moderation. So you have to include all of the elements who might be affected by the decision. So there's no point, as some would have in Northern Ireland, having a deliberation which is just going to have nationalist voices in it. And it has to include moderation. So people have to be willing to listen to the other side and potentially to soften their views. Not that they must soften their views, but they must be potentially open to it. So in the Northern Irish context, we're talking about setting up a citizen council, very similar to how the Ostbelgian, the East Belgian Council was set up in Belgium. And it would have randomly selected members, as well as 6 members from civic, nationalist and unionist groups. The public could make submissions to it. And the Youth Parliament, which doesn't do a lot there at the moment, could be strengthened and could feed into it. But the idea then is that this Citizens Council could actually start running citizens panels, holding public consultations, holding citizens assemblies on different areas. And we would like them to, in the beginning, to look at areas that are cross-cutting cleavages. So Northern Ireland, for example, has a serious problem with youth unemployment. It has a serious problem with deprivation, with drug use. So these kind of issues could be the issues that they would look at first. Trying to look at the issues of communities on either side of a peace wall, rather than looking at the issue of the of identity, which of course is very polarizing. It would only be once the sort of deliberative system approach was inbuilt for several years in advance of a referendum that you might even consider a citizen assembly on the possibility of reunification, in which case it would work with the Republic of Ireland. And we're talking about it possibly being held under the auspices of the Special EU Programmes body, and we have an international fund for Ireland in the US to try to get it away from the kind of partisan polarizing sort of feel. But this is very much an initial suggestion, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of work and debate and deliberation on it before anything comes of it. But yeah, Ronan and David just thought it might be interesting to share with you. So
I'll just give a short kind of summary of that last piece. I think it's important to the topic. Then we'll open up for questions. רק לוודא שזה מובן, המודל שמוצע לצפון אירלנד, שזה מקום מקוטב בקונפליקט שונה ודומה אלינו, הוצע מודל שמתבסס על המודל של מזרח בלגיה, ששם הקימו אספת אזרחים קבועה לאוכלוסייה שגרה במקום שהיא במקור דוברת גרמנית. היה שם כיתוב בין האוכלוסייה הזאת ואוכלוסיות אחרות. פה בצפון אירלנד הם רוצים להקים מודלים דליברטיביים. ההצעה של המומחים שמלווים אותם הוא לבנות אימון, כדי לבנות אימון גם בתהליכים האלה, וגם בין אוכלוסיות מקוטבות, להתחיל בנושאים שחוצי זהויות, שחוצי בקעים וקונפליקטים. זאת אומרת, יש שם בעיה של ניצול רעה של סמים, או בעיה של בני נוער מובטלים, אבטלה אצל נוער, אז שמה זה נושא שנוגע גם באוכלוסייה הקתולית וגם בפרוטסטנטית, ולהתחיל עם נושאים כאלה כדי לבנות גם את האימון וגם את הפרקטיקות של חיזוק השריר הזה של דמוקרטיה דליברטיבית, ורק אחרי זה אולי לקחת נושא מורכב הרבה יותר, כמו האם צפון אירלנד צריכה להתאחד עם הדרום, עם הרפובליקה האירית. So I tried to translate what you said. I'm not sure it came through completely, but let's open up for questions, and people are welcome to ask anything, right, about all these models or any of the things that might have arisen. אתם מוזמנים לשאלות. גם אם מישהו רוצה לשאול בעברית ואני אתרגם, זה גם בסדר.
Hi, I'm Cmdו from Hebrew University. First of all, thank you very much for this talk. It's always a pleasure to see the people that you've read. So nice to meet you. I would like to maybe ask or suggest or invite the other participants to think about the place of learning in the process. And I think that in the first slide that you showed us, learning was a stage. Whereas I'm very interested in ways in which learning is a part of later stages that you demonstrated. For example, evidence finding in terms of epistemic plurality. How do we, for example, assess or weigh different evidence? I mean, I'm thinking of everyday evidence, of everyday experience as evidence, and how do we ensure that within the process? But also in terms of development, how do we create citizens that are able to engage in more complex epistemic inquiries, perhaps, or evidence-seeking activities, maybe in the sense of citizen science? That's part one. The other part is in deliberation. And my question is, do you have any insight on designs and facilitation for inclusion and moderation in the deliberation, because we know that inclusion and moderation are, I come from political education. So we know that these are very essential parts of the political education with K-12, right? But with adults, my question is, how do we know, or do we know anything about designs that enhance inclusion and moderation? So 2 questions. Thank you.
Simple questions.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, of course you're right that there's learning throughout it all. It's just when you're trying to depict these things with an infographic, like you have a kind of a God figure over. But yeah, so there's definitely learning throughout, and it's, I suppose the important thing to think about is the different types of learning. So that's where I was trying to come to. So first of all, we have the experts, the interest groups, and the people's voices. So those are important, but also where the bias comes in with these. So who has actually chosen them? Who has nominated them? Then there is have the citizens themselves had the ability to ask for different voices, to make requests about their own experts? Have they been able to make changes to it to make sure that it's not manipulated? Is there some kind of standard way of looking at it and trying to ensure that there's at least as little bias as possible, or where there is bias, that the bias is explicit and noted so that it can be, balanced with a different bias? So all of these things are important, but it's also really important that there's the other side, which I think you're referring to, which I think kind of ties the two together, which is that, even in third level classrooms, students have different learning styles. So some people, learn informationally, other people learn verbally, they're more numerate. And in a citizen assembly, the cognitive variety is even greater than in a third level classroom. And so we have to be very careful. I'm not sure whether we always are enough, but it is meant to be done at reading age of 12 in what is called plain English. That's for all of the presentations, as many videos as possible, because people find it easier to engage with people. So actually the move to online really helped that, because everybody had to make a video, and therefore we could share all these videos earlier with all of the assembly members, and they found that quite helpful. And the other thing is the constant evaluation. So it's not just an evaluation at the end of the process, it's an evaluation after every event. And then we use that evaluation to inform the next event. So if we find in that evaluation that somebody found there was somebody at their table or in their breakout room who was dominating, we talk to that facilitator, we move them, we make sure that doesn't happen. Or if we find somebody found it difficult to engage with the material, then we make sure the next week they get it earlier, maybe even that somebody talks to them about it, and that there's a greater focus on it being simplistic. And we ask every week, and we measure the videos. We can measure how long people spent looking at them, so we know which ones were more engaging and which ones were less. So it's never perfect. It's always a matter of improvement, but it's definitely a very important element, as you point out.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I'm really intrigued about processes of assessment and evaluation in learning. Quite obsessed with it, actually. And I could ask so many questions now, but I will...
You'll let some others.
But yeah, let some others
it all comes from a fascinating group of researchers and practitioners called Dialogos, and they're working with us on climate assemblies, climate conventions now that we have all over the country. So these questions are very, very relevant to us right now. I want to ask a quick question to you, Jane, that kind of comes off of what Ido was saying. Many people in Israel that I've explained this thing to react, say, well, this idea of inclusion and moderation, that could work in Ireland, okay, but not in Israel. You know, we have, people have very entrenched views, very emotional positions. If you get people together on a divisive issue, how can you really ensure that there will be moderation, that there will be people weighing evidence? And maybe I'll take the extreme view. Maybe this is not a model that's good for Israelis.
Maybe. When we first mooted it in Ireland after the crash, we were told that, oh, that might work in Canada. They're all so polite, but it won't work in Ireland. You know, it's too divisive. And so we did an experiment, and we the citizens, and we demonstrated that in fact it could work. The other one that you come up with all the time is we already have a citizen assembly. It's called the Parliament, you know, and because politicians often feel very threatened. And of course, the answer to that is these citizens are only there for a short term, and they're moved in and out. But I think every country where this is first started, the people who are skeptical always say, oh, that can work somewhere else, but our country is exceptional. It's different. It's more polarized. I can tell you that when the politicians in Ireland tried to debate abortion, they were debating the tiniest of tiny little amendments that would just allow a woman's life to be saved, and in a miscarriage, so really tiny. And the abuse they got was absolutely dreadful. Some of them have to move houses. Their families had to move out of their houses. There were protesters. The things they got in the post were disgusting. You know, it was very, very difficult for them. But when the Citizen Assembly did it, the politicians then afterwards were actually able to change the discourse. They were able to be more accommodative, and they were actually able to hear the kind of the middle views. Before this, they'd only heard the people who were normally invited into TV studios. So they'd only heard the most extreme views, which of course TV producers like, because you get one other, but they'd never heard most of the people, you know, in the middle of the bell curve. And so this actually gave them an opportunity to hear those people. And they were really surprised. Like one of the politicians said to me, you know, it's really odd. I deal with politicians all the time. Irish politicians are very close to their constituents. And but they always talk to me because they want something. They want some more money for the sports club, or they need something for the school, or they want something for the road. So this is the first time I've ever sat with a group of people who could vote for me and talked about an actual issue, talked about climate change, talked about abortion. And he couldn't get over it. Because he'd never heard those views. He'd only heard the views of course, the most engaged, who are those at the most extreme.
Jane, I have a question too, referring to your last slides, that perhaps you could show it again, for the institutional infrastructure you're suggesting. Perhaps you could elaborate a little bit about that, meaning we know what is a citizen assembly, but in your proposal, we have a few more institutions like the Citizens Council and panels. So what are they for? And where do you put most of your energy in this initiative?
Okay, so in Northern Ireland, there's already been a couple of small experimental citizen assemblies. There's been one on social care, for example. And so they know what the model is. There have been plenty of citizen assemblies in the UK and in the Republic, and they know that it probably can work. The big difficulty is that it's very polarized, that one party, Sinn Féin, have said that they want an All-Ireland Citizen Assembly as soon as possible on reunification. So, of course, if they hold an All-Ireland Citizen Assembly on reunification, the unionists will just say, well, we're not going to be part of it. They will just veto it, right? So it's not going to be very useful. It's going to fall at that kind of test of inclusion. So we looked to Ostbelgien. So in East Germany, what they did is they wanted to institutionalize having a yearly citizen assembly, but to take it out of the control of the parliament. So what they did in Ostbelgien is they set up a citizens' council. And this citizen council is made up of 2/3 of randomly selected citizens and 1/3 representatives of politicians from each of the parties in Ostbelgien. And this citizen council, their job is to decide on the issues. The public can lobby for issues. They can vote for issues. Different people can suggest issues. But the job of this citizen council is decide, okay, this year in 2022, we're going to look at A and B. And we are going to look at them. We might hold one is, it's for the whole area, so it's big and important. So we'll have a citizen assembly with 100 people. So A will be a citizen assembly. But B, that's more for a small area near a village. So that's more of a citizen jury. We will have 25 people. And so B will be a citizen jury. So that's what all the citizen council decides. And then this citizen assembly and jury happen with different randomly selected citizens. So it's just that there's this overarching body of deciding, because the problem at the moment is when you have polarized politicians deciding on the issues, then the issues can get very political. And in the Northern Irish context, this would definitely be the case. So we'll put the energy into saying we need to build a deliberative system, which is to have the citizen council in the beginning that will then be able to take proposals from all the different community groups about where they think that some deliberation could help. So there will be some unionist working class women, probably, who have been trying to push for, some sort of move forward on trying to get children away from drugs. And this is something that is likely to also resonate with some of their Catholic neighbors 1 mile away, okay, because they also have this problem. So then the citizen council can decide, okay, well, let's have a citizen jury in that small working class area that has both of those communities in it. And we'll do this on, what can the community better do to support the children to move away from drugs. So it's that kind of thing. So the idea is to set up the overall institution, which is if you wanted me to share it, hang on a second, I can just do it again.
So the council is independent, but is it still formal, meaning having relationship with the government and also having the money, for example, for citizen assembly or other juries and so on?
It is set up by the government. So it's 2/3. So the Ostbelgien Parliament set it up. It's 2/3 citizens, and in its first 2 years, it has 1/3 parliamentarians. So that gives the politicians the trust in the process. So they can say, okay, we trust this process. We have our people in there in the beginning who see how it works. After the first 2 years, the politicians get gradually replaced out of the process. So more as they leave, they're replaced by citizens.
Okay, I understand.
For the first 2 years, there's 1/3 politicians nominated by the parties, however the parties want to do it, and it's funded by the parliament. It's the same thing in the Belgian parliament. They have a different one, but they actually have now one of their committees is made up of randomly selected citizens, and they fund that. Yeah.
Thank you.
two questions, please. One is, you said that the the UK Assembly was made of or sorted by the Brexit referendum results. Do you think it is possible to sort people by the political leanings, party leanings, and the political views? The second question, what are the methods by which the moderators can moderate within the group, specifically in assemblies? Which are the methods that can alleviate or reduce conflict?
So yes, like it's very much almost the UK model now, that they that one of their selection criteria is on some sort of views or attitudes. So I think it started with the Brexit one, where they made sure to balance because they did it after the vote. But then in the first Scottish Assembly, there was a lot of pushback from the Scottish Tories and the Labour Party, who were concerned that it was the SNP trying to get independence by the back door. So that assembly was done by a vote at the previous election. So that was voted the previous election by SNP, Tory and Labour. But then the problem was then the next election was such a landslide for SNP that they decided not to do that, because then it would be too dominated by SNP. So in the end, how that was done was by vote at the last Scottish independence referendum. So so that meant that there was a greater balance. The SNP could have fought that, of course, but they were the people who wanted the assembly, so they agreed to this. The other really interesting thing that they actually did in Scotland was that they oversampled the young. So they had the view that climate change is an issue that affects you if you're young for more years of your life than if you're old. And also to represent unborn generations. And so they put in double the registration, double the level of 16 to 25-year-olds that there are in the population, and also had sessions with the Youth Parliament, which are the 12 to 16-year-olds. So I thought that was interesting to really try to bring in the voices of the young, because of course we know that most of our politics in most places is dominated by the voices of the old. And then the second one is about ensuring moderation. Generally what happens is that when the people are first brought together, they're asked, how do you think we should proceed? How can we have polite discussions where, you know, you're all going to feel happy? And people generally suggest all the things that you're going to want them to suggest. So they generally suggest, well, we should listen without interrupting, or, you know, we shouldn't call names, or we shouldn't, you know, and so most people will suggest this, and then it becomes a kind of a bottom-up thing that can then be agreed. In one of the Irish assemblies, one of the first ones before we knew this so well, it was imposed top down, but that still worked. We got everybody to vote on it and to agree it. And then we had the principles put in the middle of each table, laminated. So if somebody was breaking one of the codes or the principles, the moderator, the facilitator could easily refer to, you know, oh, sorry, Jane, I think now we need to hear from Aaron. You know, we haven't heard from Aaron yet. So this is how they do it. And then we ask at the end of every session, we ask the citizens. And in the last one on gender, for example, after the first weekend, we found there were 3 or 4 people who said, well, it was fine, but there was definitely somebody dominating at my table. And so we went to that facilitator, we told them about this, they knew who it was. We made sure to make sure that that individual was put with a strong facilitator at the next event. And then also they all agreed and talked again about the importance of somebody not dominating. And it didn't actually happen again. It was interesting.
Jane, thank you for that. I think there's a lot of curiosity on what kind of methods of facilitation can actually create a deliberative, inclusive, and an atmosphere to actually learn. And I'm curious as to, in the Scottish Assembly, you said there were many people came from many different positions, cultural and geographic positions and economic positions. Can you say something about what you think the Assembly did to people's awareness about other positions? Were they changing their initial positions on things? Was it really deep dialogue, or were people rehashing things that they already believed in? What were your insights there?
So generally, so the full research isn't out yet, so I can just give you my kind of initial impressions, but it kind of builds on our deeper ones in Ireland. So we find there's a couple of things that go on. First, people tend to engage with the evidence that they're presented with, whether it's the experts or the interest groups or the other citizens. But in fact, the deepest engagement is often with the personal testimonies. So the testimony they hear from other kind of regular people and how this issue has impacted on their life one way or the other. But they engage with all of the evidence. So what we usually look for is kind of evidence of sort of reason giving. So it's not necessarily opinion change that might happen, but it's that when people are talking, that they start to give reasons for their position, rather than just oh, well, that's my position because it always was. The other thing we find, we just published a paper earlier this year on it, which is on building empathy. So the kind of engagement with the personal testimony is more likely to make people deal with empathy with the other side, to have what is called in the literature other regarding behavior. So you're not just thinking about how you yourself might deal with it, you realize that that you need to think about other people. So we found this, for example, in abortion, where some of the older men, especially the older rural men, would have stood up in the end and said, well, I was always against abortion. You know, the church said I always was. I didn't even think about it. I don't like it. I don't like it. But I'm not going to stand in the way of somebody else who needs it and make her life difficult. So for the first time, he was thinking about, well, what is the position of somebody who might need this, rather than what is my view that I must impose. So that's kind of what we aim for. That's the ideal. And I'm not saying that all deliberative processes get there with all people all the time, by no means. But, you know, if 10%, 11% of the people are kind of moving in that way, then that's really, really successful. And just in terms of any of you who are thinking about facilitation, there's an Australian academic, Nivek Thompson, and Nivek has a really great podcast, which is almost entirely about facilitating deliberative events. And she invites in all sorts of people to chat about the challenges of facilitation. So I'd highly recommend Nivek's podcast to you.
Jane, can you just repeat that name? Nivek, what's the surname?
Nivek, N-I-V-E-K.
Okay.
Thompson, Thompson. She works with Lynn Carson in the Democracy Institute in Sydney.
What's the name of the podcast? Do you remember?
I have to look it up.
Because I actually sent out the podcast that you were on, that you featured with Dave Farrell. But that's not that. That's in hindsight or something like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we did a few different ones. I'm not sure which one it would have been. Hang on, my podcast app is being slow. I'll just Google it here quickly for you.
You can find it for us, and
you can send it to us later. No worries.
Later, we'll find it. We'll find it. But that's a good tip. I think there's a lot of need for us to learn those things here. Are there any more questions?
Deliberately engaging.
Deliberately engaging.
Great, thanks.
Cool.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much. I was wondering about, you gave an example about the man, an older man who said, you know, I've always been against abortion. You know, I've heard these testimonies, I've heard other viewpoints. I'm not going to stand in the way of other people. And I hear that, and I kind of, it makes me think of two different categories. One is a category where we're discussing something or deliberating something, and there might be very much opposing opinions, but it's not a zero-sum game. Meaning, if I, as a more conservative person, allow, you know, kind of don't stand in the way of other women doing something that I'm against, it's not so much a zero-sum game, it's more like a strong opinion. And I think, so I live in Jerusalem, and I've worked a lot on like Jerusalem issues, so between Palestinians and Jews living in Jerusalem, such different views of whose city this is, who should be able to call the shots, who should be able to have a say. And I think in our context, it very much feels like a zero-sum game. So if you would have a process in our context whereby Jews and Arabs living in Jerusalem would come together, and even if we start on the topics like you suggested, we'll maybe start on topics like youth unemployment, which is not at the heart of the conflict, but maybe something that bothers people on different sides of the alley. It still feels like the solutions or the approaches are not only polar opposite, but also it feels like a zero-sum game. Like if we have it your way, I'm gonna lose. And if we have it my way, you're gonna lose. And so I wonder how in those contexts, you know, what we're talking about fits in or not.
Yeah, so that politician or that man who would always have voted pro-life would have seen it as a zero-sum game before he became a member. You know, it was the same with one of the politicians who went into the committee afterwards, and he changed his mind. He said he was another rural, older male politician who said, you know, that he was born pro-life. He'd always been pro-life. He'd voted for the pro-life amendment in 1983. And that this time he didn't think that he was going to vote for its maintenance, even though he was still personally pro-life. So what he did is he saw the rules of the game as having changed. It wasn't that so now before this, his view was that he must maintain the pro-life position and vote for that at all costs. And if he didn't do that, then he was going to lose and the other side would win. But then he was able to look at it and say, well, actually other people are impacted by this maybe more than I am. And maybe if I actually give them some movement, I'm actually being the better person and therefore I'm not going to do it. So the way he calculated those sums changed. And that has to be what happens. So that's why it's important that there's cross-cutting issues. Well, like when we think about Northern Ireland, you know, if you're a unionist and you're sitting in Belfast and Sinn Féin trying to persuade you into an all-island citizen assembly that you see as just going one way to reunification, why would you engage? Because that's a zero-sum game the same way, right? So you're not going to engage. You're just going to boycott it. You're going to veto it. You're going to do your best to undermine it. So that's why we have to think about, well, what are the kind of issues where you might be in there and you might actually be able to see that there's some advantage to you in being in there. So if you are a unionist, is there an advantage to you in going in and looking at, well, how do we improve drug crime? Yes, there is, because your children are going out and, you know, maybe they're going to be attacked on the street by somebody who has a drug problem. Maybe you're going to be robbed. Maybe your car is going to be destroyed. Maybe there's going to be a riot which is going to destroy your shop, you know. So there could be lots of things where this problem is going to impact you. And if you can then be seen, if you can try to look at ways about trying to solve this issue, which will then make your life better because your children can walk the streets more safely, your shop is safe, there's less likely to be riots, then this is a win for you, as well as a win for the children who are maybe using less drugs or less in control of the gangs or whatever it is. So, so that's how we see it. That's how we're hoping. Now we have, like as I said in the beginning, you know, Ronan was pushing me this way, and I said, okay, look, it's very early. It's very tentative early stages where we're proposing this. It's only being published for very initial kind of talks this week. So I'm not sure where it's going to go, but that's the kind of the thinking about it, that if you can help people to see that there are actually issues which can be solved by us working together, which would make both of our lives better, would make our community's life better and your community's life better. But you don't go towards the two-state solution. You don't go to any of these things. You know what I mean? Yeah.
A short question. It is highly amazing that you succeeded in the Irish abortion case. How do you explain this success? And how did you control the inside atmosphere from the outside storms of this campaign that was quite hectic and quite wild, I would say? How did you succeed in kind of isolating the group or the assembly from the outside world?
Well, it wasn't me who was doing that. So there was a fantastic secretariat who did it. And yes, you're right. Like we were in a very nice hotel by the coast, you know, with lovely views of the ocean and the breaking waves and everything, and nice grounds. But at the entrance to that on Friday evening and at the exit on Sunday afternoon, and if you went in and out during the weekend, yes, there were people there with their big placards and shouting things and throwing things and, you know, horrible pictures on their placards and all of this kind of thing. So the people were sheltered from that because the police were asked to kind of police that. They weren't allowed into the hotel grounds, and we gave them a very nice time in the hotel. So the hotel was in its own grounds. There was no possibility that this actually came in to the work at the time. And then second of all, they were told that any of the interest groups who were involved with the demonstrations were told that if they contacted any individual member of the assembly, then everybody from their interest group would be banned from giving any evidence. And this seemed to work. Now, some people are unsure whether this would work in the Northern Irish case, and they're saying, you know, that maybe some elements will have to be held, you know, with a bit less transparency or whatever. So I'm not sure exactly where that's going to go, especially in terms of the voting. But that's how it happened with abortion, that there were people there who were very carefully minding them. Everybody was very aware of it. And so they themselves felt that they were there together to do a serious job and to, you know, put this to the back of their minds. And I think the politicians were so pleased because it was much harder for the politicians to avoid that, of course, because the people can get closer to the parliament, they can get closer to the politicians' constituency offices, they know their personal addresses where they can put things through the front door. You know, they didn't know the personal addresses of the citizens to be able to do that.
We have any...
I have a question. Not a very deep one, but whenever I wanted to argue for citizen assemblies like 10 years ago, I had to mention, of course, the amazing citizen assemblies in British Columbia and then Ontario and the Netherlands and so on. But I also had to say, you know, but it really didn't succeed to impact reality all the way. Now we have the Irish experience and we can say, look at the success. So as an expert on citizen assemblies, what would you say that are the second and third best examples of citizen assembly in the world today after the Irish Assembly in terms of impact on reality?
Yeah, there was a lot of hopes for France because Macron really said that he was going to do a lot of things. But the problem was that it didn't then go out because of the semi-presidential system. It didn't then go out into the parliament. There's more things happening now, so it looks like maybe some things will pick up. So, you know, if the French did implement the policies that they proposed for climate change, then that would be huge. But that's still a kind of a wait and see. So I guess the next would be the Belgian, because in Belgium, they actually have a citizens council now in Ost-Belgium. They actually have a citizens committee in Parliament. And, you know, because it's in Belgium, then the Conference on the Future of Europe is looking at it. So it's managed to influence that. So I think Belgium is probably very influential, and we'll see what happens. I'm also really fascinated about what's going to happen in Chile. They didn't randomly select their citizens, they elected them, but they were quite a radical group because they had all sorts of rules about gender equality and about inclusion of indigenous people and things. So I think the ruling parties were very surprised by the composition of the assembly that was elected in Chile a few weeks ago. And if that manages it, that will be very historic, because that'll be, you know, rewriting the Pinochet era constitution that has been there for many decades. And of course, the British ones are great, but at the moment they haven't, they're really good processes, but there hasn't been a government that's actually implemented them yet. In the UK, there's individual good ones. So like in different cities, in Bristol, in Oxford, in different towns and cities around England, the city councils implemented them, and there's quite far-changing kind of policy change to different kind of climate initiatives which has come out of them, which is interesting. So I think all of those are interesting. And I hope, is your new president, do you have a new president now?
Yes, today.
Today. And I think his grandfather was the first chief rabbi in Dublin.
He was, yeah.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
His father, I think, even had a Dublin accent. So so maybe he will listen to a little bit more of the Irish experience.
Okay, well, maybe we'll bring you in to talk to him.
I know one of my friends lives in his grandfather's old house. There's a plaque on the front wall.
The one in Herzliya?
Sorry?
The one in Herzliya?
The one in Portobello.
Oh, the one in Ireland, sorry. I thought the one in Israel. Sorry.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I think the Irish connection is coming at us from very different places. Let's see if there are any more questions, or we'll wrap up. Shaלות? Comments? I would really like to thank you so much, Jane, for coming and being with us. I think you've given us a lot of insights as to the professionality and the expertise that is being gained around these systems and these models, and a lot of the learning that's coming out of that. I took away a lot of ideas that you brought here that I think are really relevant to us. And we have a constitutional crisis here, and the world is in many ways we see ourselves as a startup nation, but we are far behind the democratic deliberative wave of the rest of the world. So we'll catch up one day, and it's inevitable that we'll catch up in Israel as well. But at the moment, I think our political system is suffering from all the worst sides of what representative democracy could bring out in people. So it does give us a ray of hope and a horizon and the learning with people like yourself is very valuable for us. I think it gives us not just hopefulness, but also ideas and concrete ways of going about it. And I do take your idea about maybe we'll link up with a new president, really. Herzog, because presidents look for ways of bringing people together and doing something sort of non-political, but also that links people up democratically. It could be a way in. So really thank you very, very much. Will anybody else like to say something to Jane before we pop off about what you've taken away from this, or what's this? How has this been for you in this session? Or another question?
Just a simple thank you very much, Jane.
Pleasure. Nice to see you all, and best of luck with your endeavors. I'll be interested to see where you go.
We'll report on.
Right. Okay.
Thank you very much, and good luck, Jane, with your endeavors as well.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
ביי.
המפגש הבא, לא הספקתי להגיד לכולם לפני שבחרו, 7 ביולי, אנחנו מארחים את פרופסור גרהם סמית, אחד מהאורים ותומים של דמוקרטיה דליברטיבית, גם בתיאוריה וגם במעשה, ואתם מוזמנים מאוד.
7 ביולי ידוע מתי כבר?
ידוע, כן, אותה שעה, ב5 או 5:30, באחר הצהריים, אנחנו נפיץ כמובן.
תודה.
נשלח הקלטה כמובן.
תודה.
תודה רבה.
תודה, ביי.